Quinshon Judkins and RJ Harvey are two of the biggest rookie winners from the NFL draft. We'll tell you why next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Armada Draft Pick of the Week later in the show. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. Kate, we survived the NFL draft, and today we're looking at some of the biggest rookie winners from over the weekend. And let's start at the running back position. We knew that there were going to be a lot of running backs drafted, and there were. Let's start with Quinshon Judkins, who not only got drafted in the second round, but he was the third running back off the board, Kate.
Third running back off the board. And it did kind of feel like it was out of left field, right? Because Quinshon Judkins was usually in most rankings somewhere between, running back 4, running back 5. TreVeyon Henderson, his teammate at Ohio State, always kind of had this edge over him in the pre-draft ranking process, the consensus boards. Like, it felt like it was out of left field. But let's go back and talk about Quinshon Judkins, the player, real quick, because I think people maybe, I don't know, it felt like, especially after the combine, there's just a general overthinking process when it came to Quinshon Judkins. He has proven that he can take on a RB1 workload at Ole Miss, then Ohio State had to share that role, but we know he's capable of it. He was productive. He checked that box pretty fairly easily here. He plays with some power, contact balance, and then you throw in the fact that he had an absolutely stellar combine where, per NFL Combine IQ, courtesy of NFL.com, they are the same graded athlete based on their combination of size, speed, testing, etc. Not too shabby. And now he goes to a place with the Cleveland Browns where he could have a very sizable workload day one.
And I think he will. The Browns obviously lost Nick Chubb and Dante Foreman, who were on the roster last year. They still have Jerome Ford and Pierre Strong, but whatever. I did want to ask you about Dylan Sampson, who the Browns took, I believe, in the 4th round. We thought Dylan Sampson could potentially be drafted maybe bottom of the 2nd, top of the 3rd, and he ends up going into the 4th round. Does the presence of Dylan Sampson scare you at all?
I don't think so, because of the fact that Dylan Sampson is kind of one of these undersized running backs who I think has a lot of talent, but 5'8", 199 pounds. I think what we're kind of looking at is a really nice complement to the skill set that Judkins has. Like, the acceleration that Sampson plays with, I think pairs really nicely with some of the more maybe I say boring aspects of Quinshon.
It's just the power football. Judkins is going to be the between the tackle guy. And the thing is,
Sampson's going to add some explosive element to the
Yes.
game that maybe doesn't always show up on tape as often as you'd guess based on the testing for Quinshon Judkins, right?
The reason why it doesn't scare me that much is we knew that Judkins was always going to be part of a committee, but the fact that he was drafted inside the top 40 selections just means that he's going to be the head of the committee, right? I still think he's going to get 15, 16 touches every single week in that Cleveland offense. Now, the concern is this Cleveland offense going to be any good? Is the offensive line going to hold up? I don't know. Their tackle situation is pretty rough right now, but the fact that he was drafted so high, the fact that he's not going to be splitting touches with an established running back at all makes him a winner for me. I want to talk about some of the other running backs, Kate. What about RJ Harvey, who we knew Denver was going to select a running back. We thought maybe it would be Omarion Hampton in round 1, but RJ Harvey going in round 2 to the Denver Broncos, pretty surprising.
Very surprising. And I mean, coming out of UCF, 24 years old, he was a 6-year senior. Like, again, one of these guys that's a little on the smaller side is 5'8", 205 pounds, but goes into this position coming out of UCF where he is very much in line for a potential massive workload, right? Like, who are we really projecting to take over this Denver Broncos backfield? I think the fact that you're looking at a guy who was drafted as highly as he was drafted, like, that kind of tells me everything we need to know. He has not been like a dominant receiver, but he's had kind of a steady floor of receiving work over the past 2 seasons. Very productive, at least 220 carries in each of the last 2 seasons, over 1,400 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns in each of those campaigns. Like, checks a lot of boxes in that way, but I'm just going to say, like, it doesn't really matter that I think he's a little undersized or this or that. What matters is Sean Payton clearly really likes RJ Harvey, and running backs have found a way to thrive in Sean Payton's system before.
Yeah, I watched the post-draft press conference where Sean Payton was talking about RJ Harvey. And first of all, he couldn't stop smiling, but he was telling the story about how he watched him on one afternoon for like 2 straight hours, and he told everybody like shut up about him. Like, nobody talked about RJ Harvey until after the draft. Like, it was clear the Saints were targeting Harvey, and he even mentioned the thing like, "Hey, if we can't get Genty, who's the guy that can give us the most explosive plays? We think it's RJ Harvey." The concern is that Sean Payton likes to use a heavy rotation, and there's just a good chance that this is a 3-headed backfield, right? I was going to say 3-headed monster, but that seems a little strong. But I do think Harvey has a good chance to lead this committee, and he's the guy that can make plays out of the backfield as a receiver. We like Audric Estime, but it doesn't seem like the Broncos love him a lot. I think RJ Harvey, the fact that he was picked in an offense that desperately needs some juice, and he went on day 2 of the draft, I'm buying.
Check. I do think that there's probably no rookie here that's gained more value here in these early rookie drafts than RJ Harvey. I've already started a couple of my rookie drafts, and RJ Harvey has gone in the first round in every single one of them. Not
Well,
something
that
we
seems
saw,
rich for me.
Not something we saw ahead
No.
of this draft.
I did want to mention one more running back, and you and I were actually talking about Caleb Johnson before the show. You are, again, our resident Steeler insider. You think that Johnson actually gained value during the NFL draft? What do you think?
I do. I love the scheme fit with Arthur Smith. I think in terms of just opportunity, again, I've been pretty clear about my evaluation of Jalen Warren here and what he means for the Steelers offense. I think he's a great complementary running back, but let's not forget he's on a 1-year deal right now, and he's not a guy that they have ever looked to give volume, right? Like, he's never, I believe, had more than 15 carries in a game. And that's despite the fact that Najee Harris has generally struggled. So when I'm looking at the combination of scheme fit and potential opportunity for him to take on a significant workload there in that Steelers offense, I think it's a home run pick. I know it's, a not a first or a second round fit, but we've already talked about how deep this running back class is, that maybe being drafted as highly isn't going to be as significant as it would be in a draft that maybe is a little more top heavy with a little less depth. I think Caleb Johnson's a great fit. And again, one of these guys that, I mean, out of all the players we've seen drafted, I reasonably think can get to 20 plus touches per game day 1.
Yeah, I agree with, most of what you said. Like, this is a good scheme for fit for him. He needed to go to a wide zone offense. That's what the Steelers use. I still just don't know what to think of the offense as a whole as we sit here today with Mason Rudolph, Skylar Thompson, and Will Howard as the starting quarterbacks. That's always a little scary, Kate. And you're right. Like, Jalen Warren, final year of his deal. Even this year, I think it's going to be a committee. And there are parts of Caleb Johnson's game where I just watch him and say, oh, that's an AFC North running back. And I know that's cliche or whatever, but that is, like, he is a AFC North running back. I think my concern is that you watch his tape and a lot of his best plays came when there were just massive runways for him to run through. And I just don't think he's great at creating when stuff isn't there. So I think that could be a problem with Pittsburgh having a very young and inexperienced offensive line. But I think as a whole, when you're talking about a running back that gets drafted late third round, his pathway to touches is pretty straightforward.
And here's the thing. I do think that this offensive line in Pittsburgh, I think there's a lot of talent along that offensive line. Even Broderick Jones, who's generally struggled to this point in his career, he's going to be moving back to his natural position. He's been playing right tackle here throughout his tenure with the Steelers. That's not his natural position. And I don't know if you've heard the very crass saying about that offensive linemen have about switching sides of the line, but it rings true. I think it's a different position. I think getting him back into his natural position, getting Troy Fatanu, who I think is going to be a very high upside right tackle, and two of the rookies that they had playing a lot. Like, I think this is a high upside unit.
Sure.
That maybe even if they're still getting their bearings straight here early in 2025, I think there's a lot to like about this unit in particular and what Caleb Johnson might be able to do creating behind it.
All right, let's talk about some quarterback winners from over the weekend. We had a couple that fell that will be in tomorrow's show when we look at the biggest rookie losers. But let's talk about a couple of quarterbacks that improved their dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Gametime, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Gametime makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when the demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. There are so many features that I love in the app, but one of my favorites is the all-in pricing, which means there's no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Okay, let's talk about a couple quarterbacks that maybe improved their dynasty stock over the weekend. And we got to start with Tyler Shough, who not only went in the second round, but went into a situation where he might be able to play right away.
He very well might be able to play right away. First of all, I mean, there's something to be said for the fact that he was the third quarterback off the board in a class where, I mean, we were talking about Shedeur Sanders as a potential top 5 pick. Obviously, that didn't come to fruition, but there's something very intriguing here because you're looking at Tyler Shough. The big issues that we have, obviously, he's got the age factor that is a kind of a big issue, but now he's going into a Saints offense that I guess we don't really know what's going on with Derek Carr. There's been talk that, maybe
I saw him speaking at a church yesterday where he was talking about the injury and how it's pretty severe.
So it might be out for 2025.
Or a good chunk of it. Yep.
Or a chunk of it. And if anything, I'm going to guess that, Shough is going to have that opportunity here fairly early on. And I do think that his selection with a top 40 pick, that indicates something pretty significant here for what the Saints are at least planning for in this season to come.
We should also mention, like, one of the reasons why Shough is a winner is because there's so many other quarterbacks in this class that lost value, namely Shedeur Sanders, who was a first-round pick in every Superflex rookie draft going up into the draft. And now I was working on a mock draft today that'll come out on Tuesday for 33rd team. And I have Sanders falling to like the 4th round. I don't know. I mean, maybe he goes a little bit higher than that just because of name value, but That's one of the reasons Shough is up here so high. On top of that, Kate, we should also mention the Saints, with their first round pick, took Kelvin Banks, an offensive lineman, to potentially help Tyler Shough. And this is an offensive line that has used several resources to that unit. I think 4 first-round picks since 2020. They're clearly trying to put a good offensive line in front of Tyler Shough. And at this point, Kate, like, I would be shocked if Tyler Shough doesn't end up being the starter for the majority of the season in 2025. And we talk about this all the time. Even if you are a below average starter, there's still value for that in super flex leagues because there's only a finite number of starting quarterbacks. I could see Tyler Shough now going at the top of your second round rookie drafts pretty consistently.
How do you feel about that, though?
It's fine because once you get to the second round, like, you start seeing some of the names and some of the players, and it's like, okay, I'll just take a shot on a quarterback. And because he's got some athleticism, maybe he can be a low end number 2 for me.
I mean, yeah, fair. And again, kind of one of those positions, especially in super flex leagues, where like we need warm bodies, and Tyler Shough going to be a warm body. Obviously, there's, some concerns that like it doesn't necessarily have the track record of, like full starting experience. He's got a lot of time there in the league. He's going to be turning 26 as a rookie. But again, like, you look at this guy who, had the injury concerns. You have all of these different factors. It doesn't necessarily matter if he's
so let me say this.
Starting and, throwing to, I think, maybe an underrated group of skill position players. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would also mention Kellen Moore has a pretty good track record with quarterbacks, whether that was helping develop Dak Prescott and putting together some of the best seasons of Dak's career. He went and had Justin Herbert for a year, and then look what he did with Jalen Hurts this year, helping them win the Super Bowl. Now, I'm not saying that Tyler Shough is going to be any of those 3 quarterbacks, but this isn't a situation where he's going to a coach that has a mixed record with quarterbacks. Kellen Moore generally does a pretty good job of designing offenses to suit his quarterback. I even think about when Cooper Rush went 5-1 as a starter in 2022, and Kellen Moore was the head coach. So I think this is a good landing spot for Shough, and somebody that, again, if I'm in the second round of my draft and I've got a shallower, quarterback depth chart, I have no problem at all taking Shough in that range.
Absolutely. Now, another guy that I do think is a big winner, Jalen Milroe, who got that 3rd round draft capital. So not a 2nd round pick, but he was, I think taken in a respectable enough range that when you're acknowledging the fact that he was already kind of a developmental passer coming into this situation, you look at the pathway for a potential starting job. And I mean, Jalen Milroe going to the Seattle Seahawks, I think, is an intriguing fit. Obviously, they brought in, Sam Darnold this offseason. I always felt like maybe more of a stopgap, right?
You can get out of the deal in a year.
And what you're looking at is a quarterback who maybe needs a bridge year, right? Like, there's no question about the physical traits that you have in a player like Jalen Milroe. The question is more, can you develop him into a better passer? And this might be an ideal situation for him, just to have the luxury of time before you have to step on the football field, allowing you to kind of get back to the roots, get back to your mechanics, your reevaluate everything about you as a passer. He now has the time to do that without necessarily needing to be forced into a starting lineup and set up for failure. So I think from like an opportunity standpoint, from a situational standpoint, and you're looking at Jalen Milroe and his potential to develop as the well-rounded quarterback that I hope we'll be able to see, especially for fantasy, because upside. I think this is an intriguing fit for me, especially.
Yeah, I mean, you would have ideally liked to see him drafted in the 2nd round compared to the 3rd round, because usually these quarterbacks that are drafted outside the top 50, like, the track record has been pretty mixed. Even if you think in recent years with like Spencer Rattler, who went in the 5th round, Malik Willis, who went in the 3rd round, Desmond Ridder, like Matt Corral, you know the names. I do think this is a good fit for him in his future because he's not going to have to start right away. He can sit and learn. He's in a Clint Kubiak offense that utilizes a ton of play action, a ton of rollouts, a ton of bootlegs. I think that fits him very well. And again, there is a path to playing. Like, I think if Sam Darnold struggles, we could see Milroe even this year. I doubt it, but I'm not ruling it out either. So this is not a situation where he's behind a clearly established starter like a Lamar Jackson or a Joe Burrow. He can see the field relatively soon. And that's all we wanted for someone like Jalen Milroe.
Yeah, I said in this pre-draft process, I don't know if Jalen Milroe is here for a long time, but I think he's here for a good time. And when I think when he gets the opportunity to finally see some of those starting snaps, I do project he will eventually. I think it's going to be a pretty good time.
All right, let's talk about a couple of AFC West wide receivers who gained value over the weekend. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. The Armada pick of the week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan in the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. This week, we're highlighting the top pick from our draft, the one selection that truly stood out, the guy who showcased the strength and power to push, we think, the Raiders forward as we headed to a look ahead to next season. And this week's Armada clear-cut top pick of the draft is Jack Bech, who was a standout at TCU, was awesome at the Senior Bowl, and now he could potentially be the number 1 receiver over in Las Vegas. One of the things I like about Jack Bech, he's so tough. He's rugged. He's a heavy-duty player that can handle a big workload, just like your Nissan Armada. And when we say go forth and conquer, that's exactly what I think Jack Bech can do in the NFL. It's clear that our top pick of the draft is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure and shop nissanusa.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves and news never stops. Hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Kate, let's talk about a pair of AFC West receivers that gained value over the weekend. Who do you got?
Let's talk about Jack Bech, who, I mean, from an opportunity standpoint, again, we're just kind of looking at the field and saying there were a lot of wide receivers here that I think were, kind of ranked in a similar tier, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as far as landing spot goes, Jack Bech goes into this situation with the Raiders and immediately has a pathway to being a every down contributor. When you look at that depth chart, you're saying, okay, I see a very, very nice pathway for this guy who is reliable and has historically been reliable, dominated at the Senior Bowl, can do the deep ball. He can play against zone. Like, he can do a little bit of everything. And now he comes into an offense where they need a guy who can play that role in this offense. You have Brock Bowers, works very well over the middle, but when you're looking at Jack Bech and his ability to potentially carve out a decent target share in this offense, the pathway is pretty clear here from day one.
I think the ceiling is a little bit lower because you have Brock Bowers, who's going to eat into so many targets. And then you've got Ashton Jeanty, who the Raiders are just going to feed like crazy, right? So the ceiling is lower. But I would be almost shocked, Kate, if we open up week 1 and he's not one of their starting receivers. They've got Jacoby Myers, who we like as more of a complementary player. Trey Tucker, who is a speed receiver, but not a full-time player. They drafted Dante Thornton in the 4th round, who is a speed player, but not a full-time receiver. It just seems like Jack Bech is going to get a lot of early targets or a lot of early starts. He can block. He can play in line. He can play out wide. I think he's going to be somebody that gets on the field a lot, and maybe the target share is low. But for somebody who we thought maybe could go anywhere from 50 to 125 in the draft, he landed in a pretty optimal spot here.
Pretty optimal spot. And there's another AFC West receiver that we should also be giving his flowers to, because Trey Harris, Ole Miss wide receiver, landed with the Los Angeles Chargers, 2nd round draft capital, which, boy, you've got to love a good
Way better than I
second,
thought it would be. Yep.
way earlier than I thought it would be. And again, when you look at the needs that the Chargers had coming into this draft, I thought it was pretty clear. Obviously, we had kind of a mini breakout for former 1st round pick Quinton Johnston this year, but there wasn't a ton of consistency, right, in terms of that threat along the perimeter. I think the addition of Lad McConkey as kind of this guy who can stretch the middle of the field was a great building block, but it's also really hard to continue to execute those plays when you don't have a consistent, viable threat along the outside. And Harris is a guy that I think, generally speaking, we're looking at as, I think just a natural receiver, not an elite separator, but like he's a good athlete who has good ball skills, who I think offers them more consistency that they've had along the boundary in a couple seasons here.
So I'm not the biggest Trey Harris fan. I think he struggles to separate a little bit. He's not a great athlete. He's more like a 4.55 athlete.
But he's good enough.
Yeah,
and I think that his natural ball skills and his natural ability, just I think as a receiver, makes up for that in a big way.
100%. And that was going to be my next point, is he's just a way more natural football player than what Quinton Johnston is. And what we've seen from Justin Herbert is, while yes, he loves to throw the guys like Lad McConkey who are just open all the time. He's so accurate that he can just fit the ball into tight windows. So even a player like Trey Harris, who doesn't create a lot of separation, I do think is a good fit with Justin Herbert. And I think the difference between him and Quinton Johnston is Johnston's probably the more explosive athlete, but he also doesn't get open very often. It's a lot of tight coverage. And Johnson's just so unreliable when it comes to catching the football, where Trey Harris is not. Trey Harris is very, very reliable. My comp for Trey Harris kind of coming into the draft was like young Juju Smith-Schuster, where probably better off in a slot, but you can move him around a little bit. And the fact that he was drafted in round 2, I would be shocked if Trey Harris wasn't a better player than Quinton Johnston. And now all of a sudden, to me, that's at least a 2nd round pick in rookie drafts.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. And again, you look at, I love the Juju Smith-Schuster comp, because I think that we've seen that can be kind of a high-end situation if you are in the right scheme with the potential for the right target share. And I think Harris is in that position. I do think that it's almost like they drafted like the inverse of a Quinton Johnston, where Quinton Johnston, he was this big-bodied athlete who wasn't necessarily this natural receiver, and they were hoping that he would kind of, just kind of further develop those skills into that situation. Didn't work out. So now I think they're going with the guy that they know is the proven receiver, who maybe lacks some of that top end speed, that top end athleticism, but it's good enough that when when you're looking at his abilities as a pure receiver, you're saying, okay, I understand where he can make up ground.
Doesn't it feel a little bit like Josh Palmer? I mean, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, but like just a good football player. Now, again, maybe his ceiling is going to be limited, but I do think this was somebody who landed in a spot where he's going to play a lot as a rookie. And that's why we're considering him one of the bigger winners from the draft.
For sure.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, we're going to talk about some of the biggest rookie losers from over the weekend. There's one name on here that is very, very obvious. I don't even need to mention it, but we'll look at some of the running backs and receivers that lost value over the weekend. So make sure you tune in for that. Make sure you're following Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.